one of the other members, if one of the members then shows up, one of the two of you will let me know, okay? So I keep all this squared away. All right, awesome. Kim, welcome. Want to do a quick introduction and then we're going to move on with our agenda.
Thank you. Introduction.
Yep. Name and representation.
Thank you. Sorry, technical difficulties this morning. I'm Kim Wheel. I'm the environmental planner with the City Planning Department.
Fantastic. Welcome. Okay, well, we have a very full agenda today, and I've put times on these things to try and see if we can keep on track, but we're going to go through the discussion of the programmatic use of the property. You got that agenda? There it is. Thank you. The urban forestry management plan, some look at the preliminary results of the survey, some thoughts on the restoration and trail plan, and then a little assignment that everybody has to work on between now and the next meeting. Is that looking okay for everybody? It's going to be, I'm going to have to push you pretty hard to stay on schedule because we're already 10 minutes late getting in here. So let's move ahead right away. Who's going to talk about the programmatic use of the property?
I will jump in here. And this was, I'm thinking this was, Wendy, possibly something you had asked for and we didn't get to at our last meeting. So this was a holdover from the last meeting. And you all got that report, which was just a report that Darla pulled up from our reservation system, which shows the current programmatic use of the property, the different groups using the property from 2017 to 2021. And so I just had a placeholder here to add this back in since we ran out of time last meeting. And I think there were either some questions or we wanted to briefly discuss some of the community organizations using the property.
Yeah, Wendy, did you get your questions answered on that? You were intrigued?
After I looked at the list, I was realizing that there are several other groups that use it. And I don't know if the Parks Department was aware of it, but there's other environmental ed programs that are using the Chuckanut Community Forest. And one of the prominent ones that I know some kids that go to every week is WASI Mentors, and they use it actively at least two times a week. And they're preschool to third grade age. But I don't know, if a group needs to register with the Parks Department and if other people are aware of other groups using it. I know a lot of school groups use it, but I don't think they need a permit. I did notice that Fairhaven Middle School, got permits, but I just want to know how the Parks Department manages programs in such a space as a park or a community forest. What kind of permission, and I don't think we really had the whole scope of everything that's happening there from that list. That was my concern.
Take a stab at answering that, Wendy. This list actually also includes the open space field in Fairhaven Park, because that's a common open space reservation. In the forest itself and in our other more undeveloped forest spaces, unless people are doing really regular programming, of course, anyone is welcome to come in. And we've been working really hard over the last 3 years, I would say, at identifying and even reaching out to groups that we know are doing regular programming in the forest, almost as a classroom, to try and get them inside of some sort of a framework or a contract for use. Wild Whatcom being another one that we are actually in a contract with now. So, and then any events, they definitely reach out and have to reserve space, like big events, sporting, running, or races or anything like that. So it's kind of a combination of us finding out about it and reaching out to people and getting them the information they need to make sure that we understand group use for sure and regular use. And then other people reaching out to us because they want their events to be in the playbook. So that's the other way that we find out about things and get things on this schedule. Open space reservations are done through ActiveNet, just like another reservation for a picnic shelter, but you So you are reserving the space for that use, and then we let our operations and our other rec staff, everyone knows each list of special events or any other activities that are going on in our facilities so that people are aware of what's going on.
But
Okay,
this list that we have is actually for Fairhaven Park.
No, it's
Right.
for both, because Fairhaven Park, remember, when you reserve, right now, Fairhaven Park includes the Chuckanut Community Forest in the park inventory system. So this
That's
list,
something that I really hope we could change.
we are going to change it, Frank, I promise. That's what this process will change, I promise. So,
Yeah.
It's just that
Can
we
I
don't
add-
have the data that we would like to have from this list.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that about once a year, the local mushroom club reserves the upper shelter and then goes on a foray within the forest. So I didn't see that on this list either.
Yeah,
Although there might not have been one lately.
this list did not include reservations for the upper shelter. There's a lot more reservations for that, and people may take additional walks in the forest and reserve that picnic shelter, but we didn't include that in this list.
so I guess the item on the agenda relates to, what it's going to look like in the future in terms of accommodating, small spaces for everything from preschoolers to elders, maybe off the trail a little bit for teaching areas, because some of these groups are making social trails. They love the social trails. A lot of the people are getting off trail so they can teach or have a group for a space. And so I was just thinking, as Lane develops the plan, I don't know if we need to quiz those people about what that space looks for, but I know that at least Wild Whatcom and Mossy Mentors is doing that right now. So I just, we need to reflect the educational use in our plan.
Thanks, Wendy. I think that's really helpful for me going forward to know. And I think that's a great point to better understand the needs of some of the education groups that are using it and how we can incorporate and frame that appropriately in our plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hugh has just joined us, so I'm happy to open this meeting as an official meeting of the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District. This is a special purpose meeting, so I will go ahead and let us continue with the process. Just our minutes should recognize that Frank James, Hugh Beatty, and John Brown are present.
Excellent. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. And Allison, would you make a note of that in the formal notes, please?
I got Frank James, John Brown, and the third one,
Hugh Beatty.
Hugh Beatty.
Yep. All right. Good. Thank you.
HUEBEATTIE.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. Anything more, Wendy or anyone on the activities list, program list? Sounds like a couple things I hear is that there's a desire to better document what's going on in the forested area as separate from the park itself, and that ultimately maybe that a little more attention to telling people that is what the Parks Department expects, and that maybe there are some planning aspects of that activity that need to get figured into the overall plan process. So that capture it. Okay. All right. On to Analiese and the Urban Forestry Management Plan. Analiese, I'll turn it over to you. Do you have a presentation?
Thank you. I do. And I'm actually just setting up setting up my screen so when I share it, it looks organized. Just a second. I have 3 different PowerPoints that I'll be using, so I have to get them in the right order. Okay, great. So again, for those that just joined, I'm Analiese Burns. I'm the Habitat and Restoration Manager for the City of Bellingham. I work in Public Works, which I guess a lot of people view my group as the science arm of the city. And so we support the other departments. We support Public Works, but we also support the Planning Department and the Parks Department, the Fire Department, lots of other departments when they have information needs or questions that can be assisted with data, specifically about habitats and water quality and everything science. So in this case, I'm really happy to be able to provide some information that I think might be helpful to both groups here, the steering committee and the board, which is some recent information that we just gathered about urban forests. So I'm going to give a very brief version of the PowerPoint I gave to council on August 30th, which gives the general overview. And then I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint that's specific to Chuckanut Community Forest and the data related to the Chuckanut Community Forest in particular. And then we'll leave some time for questions. So does that sound okay with everyone, or was there a different expectation?
I think if we shoot for being done by about 9 o'clock, that'll keep us on schedule, just for reference for everybody. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen.
And perhaps if I could just ask, if people have questions, could you use the little raise hand button? What it does is it pops your image up into the upper left-hand corner, and I can actually see that somebody has a question and acknowledge that. All righty.
And we can stop between the two PowerPoints, but when I'm done with the general and we go to the specific, we can take a pause and take questions at that point also. And then, but if you have an urgent question in the middle, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, great. So can everyone see my screen, the slide? Okay, wonderful. Hold on. There we go. So the urban forestry management plan is a term that some people may not be familiar with. And so let's go through kind of what the idea of it is. The city's urban forest, the idea is it can be managed in a way that optimizes environmental, economic, and social benefits. But we haven't had an overarching plan for the city up until now. The city has long valued forests, but we have been doing it department by department, effort by effort, and we really would be useful to have a tool called an urban forestry management plan to really have in that overarching strategy. Let's see if I can get it to, there we go. So the purpose, to kind of reiterate what I just said, is to create that strategic plan. And it's in order to have a well-coordinated, consistent, efficient effort so that we can have our urban forests sustainable and well-managed through time. And this is an idea that really stems from quite a long time ago. It entered into our comprehensive plan in 2016, but as Kim knows, Kim was championing it long before that. So it's something that the city has had our eyes on and we're very interested in doing for a long time. But it's quite an effort. And so you'll see why it's taken us this long to get to the data point. So an urban forestry management plan is not something that we created. It's not a new idea. There are many jurisdictions throughout Puget Sound that have an urban forestry management plan and have been using it for over a decade. Here is an example list. I don't know why my slide is not quite covering. Okay, there we go. There's a list of different jurisdictions throughout Puget Sound, ranging from Bainbridge Island to Vancouver. The graphic is actually from King County. And King County has an interactive map that they then make the data available and usable to folks on their website. So for the city of Bellingham, our effort, we really envisioned this from the beginning as an interdepartmental effort. So we've been working very closely. The Public Works Department has been leading it, but it's really been hand in hand with the Planning Department, the Parks Department, the Fire Department. And because the information that is results from this work would touch all of their work areas. The scope that we're looking at is the city limits plus the UGA. And when we talk about forests, we mean all types of trees. So we're talking about open spaces, we're talking about developed parks, we're talking about private land, public land, street trees, all of it. So the work is going to, the intent is that it will inform existing plans and regulations. And here's a list of some examples. Probably the one that's Closest to your heart is probably the pro plan, but there are many other documents, the critical areas ordinance, it would help inform that as well. Park policy that deals with street trees, a wide ranging group of plans. I'm going to try to, I'm sorry, I'm going to adjust this. I don't know why this is not working as a slideshow. We'll try that view. Okay. So the scope of work that we've been working under is that the Urban Forestry Management Plan is a very long process, and we've broken it up into 3 phases. So how we envision is we would have phase 1 would be data collection for existing conditions. And you can see in there's quite a lot of data that we wanted to get to understand where our urban forest status is today. And we completed that work in August 2021, and we'll go through some of the results. That's what I'm here to show you is the results from that phase 1. And then after, then we have just completed phase 1, so our intent is to move on to phase 2 and 3, and we'll go through that at the end of this PowerPoint. So the results, let's see some of the things that we found in phase 1. We worked with our consultant, Diamond Head Consulting. They're fantastic. They're out of Vancouver, British Columbia, but ecologically, they're very familiar with, they're in our same ecozone. And they are world renowned. They have worked in many places around the world, but definitely on the West Coast. So some of the results here, this is a graph showing the canopy cover throughout the city from 2018. So 2018 was the latest imagery that we have that can be used for this type of analysis. And we have a varying canopy cover across the city. Ranges from less than 15% in downtown to areas that are greater than 45%. And each of those squares is a 5-acre grid. Canopy change over time, we looked at a 12-year time span, so from 2006 to 2018, and we saw canopy gain in the pinks and reds canopy gain in the greens and canopy loss in the pinks and reds. So we saw canopy gain and canopy loss throughout that 12-year time period in different spots of the city. And canopy loss, I do have a summary of what the canopy loss was from. So canopy loss is primarily from development and forestry management. And the gains was from reforestation of those forestry areas, as well as development-related reforestation. So some development had to put in new trees, and that was captured in there as well. There's also restoration by private groups, as well as public works and parks. Let's see, for the forest structure, we have a data set that now shows us what does the forest look like underneath? Not just the canopy, but what does the forest itself look like? How old is it? What is the complexity of the structure underneath the canopy? And this is a graphic showing essentially the age. They're calling it forest structure stage. So shrub would be in yellow, which is essentially like your little saplings. And then as it gets older, it gets darker in color. And as you can see, the southern part of the city, including the Chuckanut Community Forest, is some of our older, more complex forests. Probably no surprise if you live in Bellingham. We also have a data set now for wildland urban interface information. So wildland urban interface, the actual map is published by the state, by the Department of Natural Resources. And it really shows you your proximity to a forest, proximity to a place that might be able to burn. That is a state map that's published by the state. We didn't change that map. But what we did was provide more information about those forests. So this graphic, Diamond Head helped us create a map showing what is the fuel loading within those forests. So now we know not just your proximity to the forest, but we know the fuel loading. And most of the city is light or medium fuel loading, very few places with heavy fuel loading. We have a wildlife corridor analysis that we just completed. This was meant to fill a data gap about terrestrial wildlife. we have quite a bit of information about aquatic habitat, aquatic species like fish. We didn't have as much information about terrestrial wildlife and the habitats that they need and which are the most important through the city. That was one of the major data gaps we needed to fill with this effort. And so I'm really happy to have a citywide map now that deals with terrestrial forest habitat that's important. So these green areas are the most important habitat areas. And what it did was it used a model that had 3 surrogate species that represented 3 types of species and types of movement that would be common within the city of Bellingham. And then they modeled the movement of those 3 species, and where we found habitat that had multiple species would use that same habitat, that was then elevated to be an important wildlife habitat area. Then they mapped narrower habitat that would be accessible for movement for multiple species. And those are our important wildlife corridors. So they are connecting the important habitat hubs. And then we documented significant movement barriers as well. We updated our street tree inventory. I'm going to go quickly through this. It probably isn't as relevant to this group, but it is a management tool for parks and public works to be able to manage our street trees throughout our city. We boosted our street tree inventory. We had just over 700 in our inventory before to be able to manage, and now we have close to 4,000. So a much more robust tool for us. Overall, the city plus the UGA has 42% canopy cover. And the city alone, if you just take within the city limits, it's 40%. And if you compare that across jurisdictions in Puget Sound, we have some jurisdictions are as low as 19%. I think it's Tacoma and City of Vancouver, I believe. And then as high as 45% in Lake Forest Park. And we are on the upper end of that range. And the lower part of the slide is showing you percent canopy cover in the green. So this would be by land use. So this is the percent of canopy cover within that land use. And then next to it is blue is the corresponding acreage that represents. So for instance, private land, which is at the top, if you took only private land in the city at UGA, it would be 38% canopy cover. And that in this would be, there's about 5,000 acres of that in the city. Right-of-ways, in contrast, are only 26% canopy cover, but they're only 982 acres. Of interest is probably the all city-owned. So all city-owned property is 75% canopy cover and represents about 2,200 acres. Canopy change over time. So this is interesting. It has 3 bar graphs and they represent 3 different time periods, 2006, 2013, and 2018. And the different bars represent different ways of looking at it. So the sage color is city only, so within the city limits. The light blue is just the UGA. And then the darker teal green is the city plus the UGA combined, so total. And any bar that you look at through time, it's very stable. So what's interesting is that in a 12-year time period, the total canopy cover, the overall canopy cover that the city and UGA have been very stable. However, you might remember my previous slide that showed we have canopy gains and losses in different parts of the city, but overall, our gains are keeping pace with our losses. One interesting way, I mean, we can slice and dice this data any way you want, but we were interested in riparian areas. For Chuckanut Community Forest, is probably wetland areas would be more what you're interested in. But for riparian areas, it's interesting to note that in 2018, we had an average cover in our riparian areas of 45%. And that's very important to us because we don't meet state water quality standards for temperature in our city, in most of our city stream reaches. And so canopy cover is one of the major tools in order to achieve that. So it's nice to see we're at 45%. And there's some watersheds that need more improvement than others. And we can use this as a tool. So that's just a quick summary of some of the data sets that we have now for use. And now what we're going to do, the city's going to embark on phase 2. So we're contracting right now with Diamond Head Consulting, the same consultant. We're going to continue with them to do a goals establishment. So now we know existing conditions in the city. Now we really want to know as a community, what are our goals for our urban forest? What do we want to achieve? And how do those goals conflict with or synergize with existing goals and policies that we have as a city? And how do we reconcile those? So we will be completing that phase in winter 2021 through spring 2022. And there will be a significant community outreach component of that, because obviously we want to figure out community values. We need to be asking the community. After that, we will move into phase 3. So again, this is a multi-year effort. So after phase 2 is complete, we would be moving into phase 3, which would be taking the results from phase 1 and phase 2, and then looking at our current practices, our current policies and regulations, and everything that we have, like the Chuckanut Community Forest Master Plan, and saying, are we going to achieve our goals with the current practices that we have? And the consultant can help us recommend changes and prioritize our actions and wrap that up into an actual plan, which would essentially be an action plan, a management plan. We have a website, so this is going to be going on for quite some time. We're going to have different information, and the results from phase 1 actually are already posted on our website, but you can always go there for the latest information. There's the URL at the top of the slide, and at the bottom of the slide, you'll see I've circled something. There is something called Sign Up Here. So if you want to we have about quarterly updates that we send out to folks, and if you're interested in signing up for that and getting on that email list, I encourage you to do so. So perhaps we want to pause at this point. So that's the overview. And then I can dig in to the details of Chuckanut Community Forest. But do we want to pause and see if there's any questions about just that general overview?
Sure, that'd be great. Okay, Hillary, you got a question?
Yeah, well, first I just wanted to say, Analiese, that was a great overview. I'm personally, as a taxpayer, thrilled that you spent money on this consulting firm out of Vancouver. That was fascinating information. My question is, you mentioned that Bellingham's maintaining its canopy cover over time, but I'm curious if the composition of that maintained canopy cover is declining to like younger versus more established forest.
So we paid, yes, you're right. We paid a lot of money for this, but it was worth it. And the analysis we had them do for change over time was just for the canopy cover. However, we have a fantastic GIS group at the city, and we have a lot of rich data sets now. And I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think that forest structure data may have been compiled for the 2006, 2013, and 2018 years. I can't remember if they just picked the 2018 or all three. If they did all three, we could look at structure over time. But that's a great question. It's actually not one that I have asked of Diamond Head. What we do know is that what we do have is a recommended areas that could be improved map now. And I didn't show that, but we don't know about the change over time answer today, but I do have a map that I have, and it's in the report on the website, that suggests places where we can look forward to take a immature forest and make it more mature.
Yeah, I think that would be a really helpful question to answer. So I would encourage that. I mean, just my observation living in Edgemoor is huge amount of big established trees getting taken down and replaced with really young saplings. So, that's just my neighborhood, but we know that doesn't provide the same ecological benefit. So I'm curious about it.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll write that down. Thank you.
Good question, Hillary. Thanks. Wendy, you have something?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I was curious because we have so many DOT corridors, and I'm just thinking about Chuckanut Community Forest. We've got I-5 going into SR11, which is, Fairhaven Parkway, and then down to Chuckanut Drive. Has the DOT been engaged as a stakeholder in this? Because we would love to see some mitigation when they do projects or their management plan to connect with our management plan. So have they been, are they engaged as a stakeholder in this process?
Great question. They have been involved as a stakeholder in the wildlife corridor analysis. So as you probably have noticed, there is some construction going on at Patton Creek and I-5. And one of the components of that, it's a fish passage barrier that they are removing. But as a part of that, they actually looked at wildlife corridors and decided to overbuild the culvert in order to make it a wildlife corridor as well, wildlife passage. And so they have a pretty robust wildlife arm that looks at wildlife issues and wildlife crossings, and that's related to the forest really along the freeway. The freeway, a lot of the things that they deal with, it's a linear corridor, and so the issues they have is braking. They're breaking things as they go along because they're sort of crossing, and so for them, I think the wildlife corridor is related and probably the most applicable way to interface with DOT. So they have been a stakeholder. They are breaks in our corridors for our forests. Our wildlife corridor breaks are consistent with their data as well, and they're aware of our results. So we look forward to working with them when we have an opportunity to fix those.
Excellent. All right. Frank, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Kind of related to Hillary's. What's interesting to me is, as she pointed out, that big trees and little trees provide different levels of function. But I was wondering about outcomes. It's fine to have great detail and knowledge of where the forest is, but it seems like the functional components, like stream temperatures, are going to be what we're really trying to impact. If we expect fish to come back, that's a critical feature. And I was just wondering to what extent you have the functional outcomes incorporated into your planning and active measurement of those functional outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And yes, we had those questions too, and we're trying to scope this work with, okay, how do we work through these issues? And the way that we've decided to do it is, let's figure out what existing conditions are, and then we're going to figure out what our goals are. So I imagine in the goals setting, we would say, is wildlife corridors important to us? Is heat island effect important to us? Is air quality important to us? Is, what is it that we want from our urban forests? And then how does that conflict with maybe some other policies we have, like infill and reducing sprawl? And so then in phase 3, what we'll do is say, okay, if we know what we want as the outcomes, we know what our values are, is our current policies and procedures going to get us there? And I imagine there will be some no's to that. And so let's take heat island effect, for instance. If we're really interested in heat island effect related to climate change, we know that our downtown core has less than 15% canopy cover. Is that if we want it equitable across each neighborhood, if that's another goal of equity, then we would have a change in policy related to places that do not have the canopy cover that's needed for those climate change goals. Does that help weave in kind of where it would fit in the plan?
I would just advocate for a system that looked at functional long-term outcomes as the main driver in the process, rather, because that's what's really going to matter.
Yeah.
So having those goals is important. Measuring them and meeting them and that's what often gets overlooked in these kinds of long-term planning processes, is that functional outcome component. So stream temperatures, for example, having measurable goals and making that back into the overall process would seem to be one of the drivers that get us where we want to go. I've seen over and over again, I got the gray hair, people make plans and they end up on a shelf, and 10 years later, people have it hasn't had the desired outcome that they wanted. So I would just strongly encourage a look at those measurable time-limited outcomes as drivers for the process, rather than just having all the detail without those functional outputs.
Great. Well, thanks, Frank. I wrote down stream temperatures as one of the functional goals that you mentioned, and that's important to me too. I'm going to make sure that is included. If you had the time, I would love, we're going to have an outreach component to phase 2, where we're going to be asking the community, and I think this is a great question, what specific functional goals do you want from to us to focus on? Which of them do you want to be the drivers? And I would love it if you had the time to answer that question. Stream temperature is one, maybe there might be some other ones. So look for that outreach in phase 2. So late this year, early next year. We'd love to hear your input.
Just to say that the whole point of our conservation easement is to preserve those functions in our community, and our part of town ponied up. We volunteered to tax ourselves millions of dollars to preserve those functions for our community. And I think that the continuity of habitat was a very important function, and obviously the salmon restoration components, all those other things. And it's worked marvelously with the new culvert that was put in, also to accommodate terrestrial beings under Chuckanut Drive, were important additional things that are capable other places. I would hope that the daylighting of Padden Creek, for example, would be a huge expense, great outcomes, but the continuity across the Fairhaven Parkway for terrestrial animals is still a much needed thing. Currently, the signs they put up, that say this is a wild laugh, to warn drivers not to drive thoughtfully, are very helpful, but probably not the ultimate solution to those kinds of issues. At any rate, I think we would be happy to work with other communities within our city to look at ways that individual citizens can begin to participate more actively in this. There's a lot of interest and support for it, is what we've seen, I think.
Thank you.
So Nicole, just 1 second here while we're on this theme, if I could. One of our guests asked, is there a general definition for canopy?
Yes, it is the upper layer of the forest. So if you were in an airplane looking down, that's what you would see is the canopy. And canopy also refers to trees. So if in your airplane looking down, you're going to see the shrubs also, but we're talking about just trees. So there was a height layer, and I forget exactly the height that we broke it off as, probably 20 feet. So the highest layer that we see, that's 20 feet or above. That would be generally the definition.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Nicole.
Oops, I just wanted to recognize the fact that with this planning process, we're going to get a little bit ahead of the rest of the urban management plan by focusing in and taking all this information and creating goals and actions. And I really like your idea of long-term benchmarks for this particular area. And that's what we're going to do next. Analiese is going to dive in a little bit deeper to just this forest particular. And we're going to be able to really kind of get into the details that I think will really be useful for us, but also in the end of the day, be informed by the broader policies that are going to be set through this planning process. So we're going to go deep for the forest right now for the purpose of this plan, but then the other goals and policies and objectives that are going to be created for the entire community are going to come later as this process continues.
All right, that's good context, Nicole. All right, Analiese, we got about 10 minutes,
Sure.
maybe plus or minus. Nicole, you can lower your hand. There you go. Good.
Just want to make sure Michael looks like he has his hand up to do it. Or is
No,
that a
my question was already asked because I put it in about the definition of canopy.
Okay.
I put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yep.
Okay.
Onward.
Oh, and I'm sorry. I apologize. I was sharing that whole time. So you guys are probably like trying to see each other in this micro screen. You can always tell me to stop sharing. Okay. So data layers for specific to the Chuckanut Community Forest. Can you see my new slide now that says Chuckanut Community Forest? Yay. Okay.
Yep. And if you're not speaking, maybe turn your microphones off. We're getting a little bit of noise in the background from somebody. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, goodness. Hold on. Let me adjust it so it moves one slide at a time. Okay. There we go. Okay. So obviously, this is a location map. We're probably all familiar with where Chuckanut Community Forest is. Here you go. Along SR 11. Okay, so we have data layers now that show canopy coverage. So canopy, again, is that upper layer from 2006, 2013, and 2018. And then, of course, we can say change over time because we have those 3 data layers. But this graphic is just to show you that it's pretty rich data layer. It's a very rich data layer. And so we can see whether things are deciduous, coniferous, whether it's not a tree at all. That's the different colorings. Dark green is coniferous. This is the 2013 layer, same thing. And here's 2018. And then when you click on a specific polygon, there's a lot of information related to that polygon. So they'll tell you, is it a conifer? Is it a deciduous tree? What's the crown area? What's the height of the tree? The height mean, the height median. There's all kinds of information that if you wanted to dig into micro detail, or you wanted to know some sort of other analysis change over time, it is possible. And and I should mention that the height information can only be gained from 2013. That was the last time that we took LiDAR data, which LiDAR data is what's needed to figure out height. And so we can figure out canopy, which is just like an extent from 2018, but the height, the vertical, is only available from 2013. And we don't have any plans right now. The city does not have any plans for another LiDAR flight. So when the city does another LiDAR flight, we can always update this, but right now this is the best available data. So this is height classification within Chuckanut Community Forest. The darker the colors up to red would be 225 to 250 feet, but you can see the majority of the trees within Chuckanut Community Forest is kind of in less than 200 feet tall. Majority of them are more in the 100-foot range. Forest structure. So if you were to say what does this forest classify as, it would be most of it is a young forest tall, and there's a definition in the report about what that means. But it's kind of a medium maturity forest. One thing I will say about forest structure too. We didn't include this map yet. It's one that is available about available planting areas. And some of the forest structure information that we gained was that Chuckanut Community Forest, as you know, has a lot of social trail use, and a lot of the understory is going away. And so there is a lot of opportunities to improve Chuckanut Community Forest. And enough said.
Analiese, Frank had a quick question here, I hope.
Yeah, just to say that there's a designation for wetlands on the map, and there are significant wetlands in this area, and that's a defining feature, actually, as you know. And I wondered, are they tracked differently, or why are the wetlands not reflected?
Yeah, it would be wetlands that are not forested. So your wetlands are forested, so it would actually qualify as a forest. So it was categorized as a forest if it was forested. If it wasn't forested, then they would classify it as if it was a wetland, it would be a non-forested wetland. But it's a good point. We probably should be changing that that designation as non-forested wetland. But yes, you have some very important wetlands in your forest. So forest structure, just like forest canopy, has a lot of rich data to it. So if you were to click on a polygon, you have all kinds of information about average height, the number of conifers within that polygon, the number of deciduous, the amount of fuel loading that is in the forest, which is medium for this forest, all kinds of information related to forest structure. And then there's some notes. It was field checked, so there was some notes from the biologist that went out, or the forester that went out about invasive plants and different things like that. And actually, let's just go back one. So the notes, I'll just read it because you probably can't. The notes for forest health is in this particular polygon for Chuckanut Community Forest is Douglas fir beetle and dead cedar in 25% of the understory, which is a climate change question about dead cedars. There's invasive English ivy choking out Douglas fir, and understory compaction due to social trails.
So that
Fuel
broadly
loading.
covers that whole polygon. Is that correct, Annalise?
Yes,
Yeah, so
right,
it's a
for the whole
sort of general
polygon.
statement. Okay.
Because it was a citywide analysis. So that was
Okay.
that was the detail, the polygon size that was chosen for that area.
Okay.
And then there is medium fuel loading, as we mentioned before. Terrestrial wildlife habitat, this is probably one of the most important findings for you, is that Chuckanut Community Forest has not been, it's got wetland habitat, but doesn't have stream habitat. And so a lot of times it's been missed as, how important is this habitat? We know the Chuckanuts are important. The Chuckanuts are a big corridor. We know Patton Creek is important. This is kind of a connector. But this analysis that we did officially says, yes, this Chuckanut Community Forest is a very important habitat for terrestrial wildlife. So it sort of verifies some gut instincts that we have. And it also bolsters the findings in the 2015 Habitat Restoration Technical Assessment that also says this is important habitat for preservation, and I would say restoration now with the social trail expansion. And one thing to note, so this was a modeling of three different surrogate species, and all three species, this was an important habitat for them. So we had an amphibian, we had a bird, and we had a small mammal. And the way that they move is different. Their corridors are different. Their movement and habitat uses are different. And all three, this was an important habitat for them. And
just to point out that we will be planning for a larger area than just the forest, though, right? This is actually the long-term plan is going to be for a substantially larger area, including the streams and associated pond.
When you say we, do you mean Chuckanut Community Forest board?
Not the board, but the group jointly with the city that's developing a long-term management plan. It includes a substantially larger area than this, right?
Oh, yes, the Urban Forestry Management Plan is
No, not the Urban Forestry
UG.
Management Plan, but the project we're working on with Nicole for a joint long-term
the master plan for the Chuckanut Community Forest.
Yeah, the master plan will have actually a larger area, quite a bit more complex because of the inclusion of the beaver pond, the associated ponds, the associated streams, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So I can switch over to, this is the larger map and we can have lots of this is, we have the data layer and you can ask Nicole and we can get you the actual data, the GIS layers to look in deeper. But what you'll see is if you can, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Chuckanut Community Forest here is part of this much bigger habitat area and connects down to Chuckanut Bay. And there is a major wildlife corridor break here that actually is being addressed through the Patton Creek project with WashDOT right now. They are addressing it up here, but it is in place of this. This is not going to be possible. And this is a surrogate, sort of a surrogate wildlife corridor repair that they're doing. But there is a minor, a lesser habitat break right here on SR11 that would be nice to address in some way in the future. And I know we're at 9 o'clock, so I'll break, but I just wanted to briefly, I know that Nicole has shared this with the steering committee already, but I just wanted to, I'll just thumb through these really quick. All the data I just presented supplements existing layers we already have. We have a lot of rich data layers. And so we have LiDAR, which can give you some kind of cross profiles. Excuse me, we've got park trail layers and open space. We have LiDAR, bare earth, and topography, bare earth. And then what's really important from my perspective when we're talking about wildlife is we have the 2015 Habitat Restoration Technical Assessment, which shows this is Chuckanut Community Forest area. And it shows that it's also a very important area identified in that plan for protection. And I think that was done in 2015. I think if they were to reanalyze it, it probably would be put into restoration now. A lot of that understory that's important for wildlife is being impacted. Okay, I will stop there. So thank you very much. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer more questions, but I'll end.
Yes, thank you, Annalise. Nicole gave me the signal here that there's a little more time in the agenda. So if please feel free to ask any more questions of Analiese, and we'll keep rolling along here for a few more minutes. Anyone have any thoughts or questions? It's an impressive amount of data, really. Yeah.
Well, I hope it'll be useful for you.
All right. Well, if there are no additional questions, we can go ahead and move on to the next item. Very good. Well, I'm sure this is going to be very helpful, Analiese, to the overall planning process. Thank you for sharing today.
Thank you.
All right, Lane, you're going to be talking about this amazing survey that went on.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Can you give everybody a little background before we start? Remember to enlighten them on what we were doing?
Sure. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep,
Okay,
good.
great. So just a quick reminder, this is the public survey that we went through at our July 30th meeting. We refined the questions and then published this and pushed it out with the press release and the flyers we sent out. We mailed it to all neighbors within 500 feet of the planning area boundary, which is that larger planning area that this group came up with in one of our first meetings. It's been shared through the Park District Board's website, and I just checked this morning before the meeting, and we have had 537 people take the survey as of this morning. So we've had really great engagement. This report was run when I sent this out to the group. So this report doesn't include all 537 responses. We're keeping the survey open until September 15th, trying to give people a chance to settle back in after summer and hopefully get a few more responses before we close the survey on the 15th and start looking at the results. But this is a first glimpse, a preliminary look at some of the results. And I think some of the general trends are going to remain consistent even with, another 50 to 100 responses. So one thing to note is that the actual project page, so not just the survey, but the page itself has had over 2,500 people check out the project page for the master plan. So people are definitely interested in the community.
That's fabulous.
So the first question to the survey, as you recall, and it cut off the map in this report. It doesn't include the map, but this was a question about our master plan planning area boundary, which is what we're calling it, the planning area. Do you need to interrupt, Nicole?
I'm just hoping could you make it a little bit bigger? It's really small on the screen.
Yeah, I'll have to just adjust by question because they take up different
there we go.
Different views. Yep.
That's
Thank
better.
you.
Great.
No problem.
Thanks.
So this is a look at the first question, which was, do you agree with the planning area boundary that this group had come up with? And so we had come up with that boundary that really covers both the conservation easement encumbered area, as well as the whole, what the city calls the interurban greenway, all those properties that were acquired along the interurban, all the way out to the pond, and that contiguous green space. So 87.8% of respondents said, yes, they agree with the planning area boundary. It makes sense. There's 9% that had other comments, and most of the comments are not that people necessarily said, absolutely not, this shouldn't be the boundary. They're more, there was some confusion about why is the conservation easement boundary different, just a lot of kind of clarifying questions. But across the board, there seems to be agreement that this is a good planning area boundary. Question 2 was just to capture, what's our audience? Who are the people taking this survey? 98.9, so almost 100% of the people taking this survey do visit the planning area. Third question, capture a little bit more about our users. How frequently do you visit the area? The answers were multiple times a week in the green here, once a week in the yellow, once a month in purple, once a year in pink, and other. So people in other, usually it was because they go every day. That was the most common answer to the other question or the other field, excuse me. So starting to get into some of the uses of the area. This is just showing the most common uses. So almost 100% of the people using this property are out there walking. And these are not a percentage because this was the question where people could select multiple answers to this question. So people were encouraged to select all the various activities that they were doing out on site. So really the ones that stood out here are walking. The second top use out there is dog walking or exercise. Other top uses are biking for recreation, bird watching or wildlife viewing, and then education. So those are the kind of the standout uses. And I think this will probably be a really important section for us to dive into as we start working on our plan. I'm just going through these quickly and then we can go back and take questions and look at any of these specific questions that we want, but I'll just go through quickly. This question is about the planning area name. So we gave a list of 5 different options in terms of what should the planning area be named, and then also had an other text field if people wanted to suggest names. The standout name with almost 64% of respondents here is 100 Acre Woods. So 65% of respondents said 100 Acre Woods is what the planning area should be called. Then you can see the various other options. There's Chuckanut Community Forest, Chuckanut Forest, Fairhaven Community Forest, and Fairhaven Forest. And then the other is the respondents. And when we close the survey on the 15th, I'll be sending out the full, 200-page report to you all. And so you'll have a chance to read through any of those other responses to see what people are saying. This was a ranking question. So things that are ranked lower, so that means more people ranked them as their #1 top priority for this area. So people were asked to rank from 1 to 9, and 1 being the thing they most value about this property. What are their highest value or highest priority for this area? And you can see really the standout is trails, followed by quiet and solitude. So I thought those were really interesting, that the trails and quiet and solitude, which really mirrors, I think, what this group talked about during our first meeting. So I think this one was really interesting for me to read through because I think that I know there was concern early on that this group really wanted to learn more from the community and make sure that we're making decisions that reflect and represent the community. And I think this question to me was really reassuring that the community seems to be pretty consistent and in alignment with a lot of the values that this group discussed early on. So it was nice to see that. I think the thoughts and initial feedback from this group really has been mirrored by the community. Then this one, I've added this red line down the middle so we can kind of see the 50% line here. And so this was a question for each of these uses, and I'll zoom in so we can go through them. But for each use, state whether you agree or you disagree that this is appropriate in the planning area boundary. So the green are people who feel that this use is appropriate for the property. So green, yes, this should be an approved use on the property. Purple is saying, no, I don't think this use should be on the property. So taking a look, accessible paved trails, over 50% said they disagreed this was an appropriate use. Just over half of the respondents said that improved limestone trails would be an appropriate use. So that could be improved trails that are accessible, but they're not paved. Boardwalks and bridges was another standout approved use of the property. Additional parking was an interesting one. Additional parking had pretty much the highest not sure response from the group. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the open-ended comments at the end, is people are not sure, what does additional parking mean? Is that a 50-car paved parking lot, or is that adding, 6 spaces, across from View Ridge? So I think I think that's an interesting one for this group to take a look at because it had such a high number of unsure responses. Benches was an interesting one to me, that only about half the people feel benches are an appropriate use of this site. And then again, I think a lot of these responses are interesting because I might have a idea of what a bench means, and it might be very different than Nicole's idea of what a bench means. So I think these will be really good ones to go through as a group and talk about when we get the results. Recognition or memorial plaques. Again, another unsure. And I think the unsure really goes to highlight that maybe a little more clarification or clarity around what this use actually means is needed. I think that's what the large amount of unsure responses can clue us into. Overwhelmingly, folks feel that there's need for wayfinding. So we need some directional signs out there. Interestingly enough, there are people who like the fact that you can get lost out there. There were quite a few comments about that we should keep it unclear and people should be able to be lost out there. So I thought that was interesting to read through in the comments. Another kind of unsure is educational or informational kiosks. Are we talking about a giant paved stand with a kiosk, or is it just a smaller informational, kiosk at the start of a trailhead? So probably a little more clarity about the educational kiosks. People really liked the native plant garden overwhelmingly. About 65% liked the idea of having a native plant garden. It's interesting to me because to me, I feel as though that's one that's not super clear as to what that means. But people seem to really value the vegetation and plants out here. And so I think that speaks to that community value more than anything. Another one that's kind of on the fence and I think needs more clarity, the small multi-purpose outdoor seating area. And this group internally, I know we've talked about this one quite a bit as well. Kid-friendly learning exhibits. Again, I think another one where, what does that mean? Is that mean a small, a small cleared area for children to sit in a circle, or is it a, big area with manufactured seats? So I think that means different things to different people. Overwhelmingly, I think we can see that a covered view pavilion is overwhelmingly, the community disagrees that that's an appropriate use on site. And I think the informal outdoor learning spaces and kid-friendly exhibits, you can see that the numbers on these two almost are identical. They mirror each other. Another good indication that people probably feel as though these may be appropriate uses if they're managed responsibly and consistently with the goals and objectives of this plan. So we can go back through any of those. I'm just going to finish up the rest of the questions here. So question 8 was about dogs. Dogs are currently required to be on leash in this area. Do you agree that dogs should continue to be on leash in the future? So about 65% of respondents feel that dogs should continue to be on leash only on the property. About a quarter of the respondents, 25%, said no, they should not continue to be on leash. And then you'll see we did get a pretty large amount, 42 other comments where people had a lot of comments. The overwhelming theme of the other comments on this question were that there should be designated on leash versus off leash areas in the forest. And then this last question, this is just a word cloud, which is a weighted visual. So the last question was an open-ended. Do you have any other thoughts, suggestions, feedback, anything else you'd like us to know about this project? And this is a nice weighted word cloud that shows the bigger the word, the more comments that included this phrase or this word. So when you get the final report, you will have a chance to read through all, I think, 350 comments that we have received. So you will have a chance to read through all of those if you want. But for the sake of this meeting and time, I thought this was a really nice way to just look and see what are those hot topics, what are people commenting about, what's driving people to engage with this project and want to provide feedback.
But was the poop human or dog?
I would say, I think 99% of the comments, dog.
Good.
True health professionals question. Yes. Good one. All right. Any questions for Lane? That was a marvelous overview, and I look forward to seeing the whole survey. But as you said, it probably will indicate similar to what you have right now. Questions for Lane?
Yes.
Hey,
Can you
Bill,
hear
go
me?
ahead.
I was curious why the notification is like 500 feet. Well, couldn't it be anybody that was voted on the issue 10 years ago? Couldn't we just use the voters list to notify people?
Yeah, so the survey link was also sent out to the mailing list for the park district.
I know that, but
and I think the 500 feet was at the last steering committee meeting on July 30th. That was the notification that this group discussed and felt was appropriate.
How many people was that, Lane, that was on that list of 500 feet? Do you know?
Oh gosh, it was a lot.
Because it was 500 feet from the property boundary, the project boundary. So
yeah,
it was.
It would be
like all afternoon to do
almost,
that mailing.
it's probably almost everyone who who voted on it, to be honest. It was a really, really long list. So if you think of the planning area boundary that we've proposed, that goes all the way over to Hoag's Pond and north and south, that was the 500 feet buff. It was a buffer of 500 feet around that. So not just the conservation easement area. So it hit a lot of people. I think there was, I want to say, close to 600 people that it was mailed to, or 600 houses or residences, I should say.
there were 11 and a half precincts that voted on spending their money for 10 years on it. So there's a lot more people that probably didn't even know this survey existed. That's all.
We did do a press release, and it had a really nice article in the Cascade Weekly about the project and the survey. It was mentioned also by the mayor, who directed everyone to, in a city council meeting, to participate in the survey. And it was sent out to the Park District distribution list as well, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Todd, do you have a question?
No, just a comment on this topic. That also hats off to Parks for getting all the signs posted all over the south side with QR codes and letting people know the survey is going on. And we also, Recreation Northwest, included it in our last newsletter. So I think that it was a good promotion campaign for people to take the survey.
So just so we're clear, the QR code signs fed them into the same survey as that was listed on Engage Bellingham, right? It's all one survey, correct? Okay. Yeah. Are there other Hugh? Are there other email distribution lists for the area that that was taxed for this that could be accessed? Do you think? Your microphone is muted. Okay. We're having technical difficulties here. So, okay, Frank, one more question. Your microphone.
Turn on the microphone. These are really good methods, and it's a really good response. I'm very impressed with that. I would think that it might be good to augment this with some observational data. It's a little more, it's more objective. So for example, in my experience, I'm in the area very regularly, and I don't see the percentage of people biking relative to the chart that you put up. I don't see that many people biking relative to the people that I see walking. So I think that convenience sample data sometimes can be misleading, and that would be an example of one thing we might want to do is do some observational data about the number of people actually use it to bike relative to those that walk. My sense is it's probably at least 90% people walking trails rather than biking. Just experientially, it would be good to get some objective data about something like that. That is a known error in these convenience sample types of approaches. It's easy to misrepresent some things like that. And we might want to, in the more formal planning group for this master plan, to maybe consider some additional observational tools to augment this convenience sample.
Thanks, Frank. Nicole, do you want to respond to that?
Just wondering, I think it was a good point, Frank, and I think that it's because the boundary of the planning area includes the interurban, which a lot of people bike on.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so high.
That makes a lot more sense then. Yeah.
The survey also doesn't ask how frequently do you do those things. It just says, do you? So you could ride once and you could walk 100 times and you would still get a hit for ride in the survey, right? So it isn't, it's only what kinds of uses, not how frequently you go. So that would get at your question of what you see on the ground.
No, Nicole, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah.
Wendy?
Thank you.
Yes, so Lane, good job on all those graphs and the data. It's fascinating. I think it confirms a lot of the things that this group has been moving toward. I'm just wondering, in addition to this quantitative data, if we, and maybe we need to see the comments, but tag teaming on what Frank said, qualitative data, I'm wondering if you could do some observational data with groups of different ages that are using this, because it would give you kind of an idea of different age groups using it in different ways, with, which people are using the social trails more, which people are using it for larger groups. So I'm just thinking, is it possible for Lane, for you to have your intern to, go there with some of the groups that are using this area regularly and actually seeing how they use it? Because that's what I was trying to get at with the educational use of it. So, really, it would give you a sense of the spatial use of it and the age groups and how they use it. So I'm wondering if we could add some more qualitative data to this. Do we have time? Do we have the staff time or the intern time to do that?
You want to answer that, Lane?
Great question, Wendy. So yeah, I think as you mentioned in the beginning of your question, I do think the comments section will reveal a bit of that. There's quite a bit of personal anecdotes in the comments about how people are using their property, and they're really interesting to read through. There's a lot of comments about how families are using it with the various age groups. So I think there is a little bit of that in the comments that will be helpful. There's another tool on the Engage Bellingham site that's the Show Us on the Map tool. And I've enjoyed reading through, a couple of people have used that and put the pins in different places and talked about their experience in those places, whether they're restoration opportunities or kind of trail connections that need improvement. So we could think about possibly utilizing that tool in a better way to get some of what you're getting at, and really the age group use and the spatial use. I think it would be I'd like to think about that and how we can capture that, because I agree those would be helpful ways to look at use on the property.
Yeah, good question, Wendy. Thank you. Other questions or comments for Elaine before we move on to the next item? So the game plan, Lane, is to keep the survey open till September 15th. And then at that point, you'll recrunch the data again and produce a final report for everybody. And if you're capable of getting out with some intern help or something to do some other observational looks at things, that could of course be very seasonal too, I suppose. So that both in terms of schools and other programs and weather, other things, but this might be a good average time of the year to look at it, I would think, in the fall. Go ahead, Vincent.
We might consider doing a one-day survey to have volunteers at all the trail entrances, like some Saturday in early October or something, for, I don't know, an informal count. Because you know, people might go to the cob.org and look at Engage Bellingham, you know, 1,000 people did, but only half of those people got a password and got into the Engage Bellingham questionnaire. And so that shows a little bit of resistance to computer techie stuff. And I mean, we can see with just among the 20 of us that, you know, some people can't even get into a Zoom meeting very easily. So, I mean, there is that technical difficulty, but we could maybe get one more data set by doing an observational, you know, totally volunteer, like you and me and all of us at different times of day, like maybe just do one day and just count. Stand there and count the people, say hello.
Cole, what do you think of that?
I think it's an interesting idea. We do a count, at least in the past. I don't know if it was done in the last 2 years, of people on some of our core trails. It's done with Public Works for the bike and ped plan. I've done that count a few times, and it's a one-day thing where you literally stand on a corner and count every single person who goes by on either a bike or walking. But, you know, it made me think, I thought we had a question about how people access the forest. Is that not on there? I don't remember seeing that in the results, because we put the different ways that you get in. Did we miss it?
Yeah, you know what? It probably just got, you're right. I'm looking to make sure I didn't just skip it. I think I must have accidentally excluded it from the report. You're right. Well, that'll be in the final report. There's a question about how you access the property, and the standout access is off the interurban.
Yeah. And I think that question was super interesting, because in wayfinding and thinking about how we, I know that in the past, when the Park District has held public hearings on wayfinding and trails and access, that has been kind of a really important topic, and got a lot of passion about which way do you get in, and which ways maybe we might not need in the future if we're going to try and do some restoration or even obliteration of trails, or there's some access points that aren't necessary. And I think one of the access points had almost nobody going in through that way, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, Vince, let's think about that. Let's think about a one-day thing. I'm not sure we have the staff to pull that off right now in time for this project, but Lane and I can talk about it and see if we could maybe figure it out. It's just really right now where our staff is absolutely, we are very under-resourced.
Well, I wonder,
The Park District could potentially do it, though.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Sure.
If you guys could pull that off, that would be fantastic. I think that'd be really useful.
And are there other folks in the crowd here that would be willing to volunteer for something like that on a Saturday? Vincia said she would. Hillary, any other people be interested? Yeah, Kim.
I don't think we'd have trouble raising volunteers.
So if we wanted to try and figure something like that out, looks like we've got a core group here anyway. Even if you did like a 4-hour window or something like that, that's probably doable, I would imagine. So
I had one other brief comment is that I think that accessing it off the interurban, it'd be important to, many people just go through our area on the interurban and don't actually access I mean, we need to make, it might be good to be clear about that. People traveling along the interurban and not going into the forest versus people that actually use that as an access point.
yeah, that's a good point, Frank. So I saw Todd or Hillary, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to comment that yes, Nicole, those access points were in there because in the slides that we were given earlier in the email from Lane, that data was in there. So maybe you just skipped it. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah. Then another piece of this, and Lane, I'm going to talk to you and Nicole at the end of this on some more details and some stuff that we're working on. But both Wendy and I are part, and Melissa's in this thread as well. There's a new group that's formed called the Whatcom Coalition for Environmental Educators. And I think that would be a good channel to reach out and have them take the survey or get more input from them to answer the questions that Wendy has on how the forest is being used by those environmental education groups, at least for kids. But I think that's a crucial slice.
Nice, thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Good, okay. Any last minute questions? Because we need to move on, keep on schedule here. All righty, excellent. So restoration and trail plan, is that you, Lane, again? Or who's talking about that one?
I'm actually going to hand this one over to Carlina to talk through, and then I'll jump in after her. Carlina, do you want me to share the slides on my screen or do you want to take over?
If you could share that, that would be great.
No problem.
And Carlina, your role at Parks is what again, if you'd like to tell everybody?
Well, I graduated last spring from Western, and I was working alongside Lane on this project as an intern, and then they just hired me on part-time to help continue working on this as they keep going through the process.
Very good. Okay, Carlina, thank you.
Yeah. So this presentation that I'm doing is just about the student projects that were done for restoration for John McLaughlin, who's on the Park District Board. They were planning to do a presentation at one of their meetings and things kind of fell behind. So I'm going to just go over a little bit of it, not too much, it'll probably be really quickly. But essentially, the goals of this project that John McLaughlin handed off to his students were to develop a trail impact restoration design for the forest that may be suitable for potential inclusion in the master plan. However, the details that they were given are strictly environmental and restoration focused. They didn't get a lot of the nitty-gritty other details. They used the baseline report from 2017 and a trail plan that Lane made alongside other entities a while back. So they used those two sources to kind of put together something. They did a lot of work with the wetland delineations. They brought that information in to just kind of create plans for restoration for the specific area within the conservation easement. So it doesn't necessarily extend to the whole planning area, just the Chuckanut Community Forest itself. And then on this slide, you can see the design components that John kind of introduced them to and they based their projects around. And we can see number one is an approach to restore compacted soils where trails will be removed or narrowed. And so they each had maps that they drew where they showed what trails they would choose to have as main trails, what trails would be the narrowed trails, what trails would be removed and whatnot. So we'll take a look at those a little bit later. The second design component was the approach to restoring vegetation, including the removal of invasive plant species and replaced with specific plant species that are native, that are specific to this area, that would help with revegetation and soil decompaction, and just kind of closing off trails. They have a lot of different species listed for different uses that range from like water retention all the way to like blocking closed trails. So all kinds of information from all of them. And then number 3, we have structures or strategies to deter the use of closed trails or direct visitors to sanctioned trails, which is kind of what I already mentioned. They have lots of other methods that they use, and they focus a lot on environmentally friendly options and other things that are specific to focusing on those goals. And so a little bit more environmental focus than logistics. Number 4 says description of structures or strategies to restrict visitors to narrow trail treads, which is similar to number 3. Basically just kind of ways to keep people from, again, widening those trails that were narrowed for whatever reason. And then maps of the locations for trail wetland mitigation structures and the description of structures to be installed. The map should also identify locations where work to restore hydrologic connections would be conducted. So just basically restoring the hydrology of the forest between those wetlands and the significant connections between them. And then we have number 6, description to approach to restore hydrologic connections between wetlands where trails and old roads impede surface and subsurface flows. So kind of just again what I said. And then number 7 is related to what we've kind of already been talking about, a plan to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of numbers 1 through 6. The plan should include assessment at 1, 5, and 10 years after implementation of the restoration design. And quite a few of them have very detailed plans for how they would go about this and what how specific growth rates and percentages should be kind of monitored over those years. So it's very interesting information. Again, they were only given Lane's trail plan and the baseline documentation. So the plans that they did were very focused on restoration goals and not necessarily all the logistics of other planning things that go into city work and whatnot. And then I just pulled a couple of the maps that I found most interesting from the projects. I went through about 6 or 7 different student projects and pulled a lot of good information. And I have a restoration summary that I kind of made. If anybody's interested, I can send that out or have Lane send it out. But again, these are just 2 of those student drawn maps that I thought were very interesting. You can see where they decided to close some trails, a lot of the times being very close to significant wetlands and whatnot. And those on the left-hand side, you can see where they chose to do boardwalks. And a lot of them also introduced ideas on how to do that in a cheap, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly way. So that was very interesting to read through. And then a lot of description about how to connect the hydrologic connections. Again, you can see on the map that there's a lot of concurrence between them, and they do align really well with the map that was given to them from Lane. So it just kind of shows that everybody's plans and ideas for this area are very aligned and similar. And then a lot of the goals that are for restoration are also aligned with the goals that the public has for the future of this park too. And then the next slide has just a picture of the draft plan that they used from Lane. And we can kind of compare that map to the other ones. You can kind of see the main trails that they closed along the side there of the wetland at the bottom. And then up at the top towards the entrance where Fairhaven Park is, they've closed a couple of those social trails that are additional. And you can see that Lane's kind of done the same thing here. And I think that the resources that Lane used when creating this map were a little bit more comprehensive than the ones the student used, but even still, they align really well. And I think that that's all of the important information from those restoration projects. Those are also available to you, all of the student ones. I believe I got them from an email that I got from Robin for the Park District Board. So they should all be available to people online. And if you want to look through them, there's a lot of really good information in there.
I just clarify that this actually was an iterative process over more than a year, where several groups of students did it. The first effort at one level and the second effort at a lot higher level, where they actually developed criteria for the various reasons they would do things. And we also had public hearings on both of them. So we've got a lot of public input, and they are available on our website. Yeah.
Great.
Frank and Carolina, very nice. Nicole, go ahead.
I just wanted to also explain that we were really interested in this work. It's really good work. It's helpful work. And I think that the criteria that was used to kind of decide, I really do think that that focused criteria list should be in the master plan. It's a really robust and strong list of not these design components necessarily, but it's in your summary, Carlina, of and I think what I wanted to demonstrate here is that this is the kind of thing that I think has come out of the Park District Board and the work that John McLaughlin has done over the years with students. I really want to utilize that. This is good, solid work that's happened over time, and I think there's some really good content here. And so we're planning on incorporating some of this into the actual plan document.
Thanks, Nicole. And I see we have a comment from one of our participants there that all of the wetlands in the woods have degraded significantly in the past 20 years. Some degradation causes are obvious. I hope that restoration of the wetlands after determining causes will be, and I lost the last couple words there. I think I saw item suggestion number 6 as terms of monitoring or measuring had to do with wetlands, and then obviously obliteration of trails and other impacts would fit into that nicely. So looks like that's headed in potentially the right direction. Bob, you have a comment, sir?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on Nicole's comment. I would also encourage this committee to look at the restoration policies for the forest that were adopted by the Park District after considerable discussion and after all of the things that we've been talking about. Those restoration policies were, I think John McLaughlin had a big hand in those. And if we're going to be considering incorporating things like that in the master plan, that would be worthy of also taking a look at for incorporation into the master plan.
Yeah, good point, Bob. Thank you. And there was something there, Lane, you were showing the goals there for a moment.
I was checking with Nicole that that's what she was talking about.
Okay, yeah.
But that is the list here. I'll just share it again in case anyone wanted to see. This is what Nicole was just referencing, and this is Carlina's summary. And I think this is a really great place to start thinking about which goals will be incorporated into our master plan. And this is probably verbatim a wonderful list to start our master plan.
Does that reflect what the board was also working on? Similar kinds of goals?
Those are our goals, yeah.
Oh, there's from there. Good. All right.
Well, and as I mentioned, there's a set of policies that were actually formally adopted by the Park District Board on restoration, and those should be reviewed as well, I think.
Right, and those were after both these kinds of inputs, but also considerable public testimony about it at several hearings.
Great. Wendy, you have a question?
Sorry. I was going to say, Frank, could someone send that to Lane and I, that actual approved list? Because I haven't seen that.
Sure.
Thanks.
We can do that. We have sent it in the past, but yeah, we can send it again.
Great. All right, Wendy.
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we struggle with the Connolly Creek Forest Plan that was adopted by the Parks Department, we had to identify a lot of the invasives, and working both with Public Works and Parks, removing those invasives with volunteers and staff, I think is really important now with global climate change. Where one of the invasives you had mentioned was ivy, but I go in there and there's and there's a lot of English hawthorn in there, which is also an invasive tree. And so, you know, it's really fun to plant trees and plant natives, but I don't want to underestimate how much energy we need to put into the restoration efforts to remove the invasives more aggressively. I think if there is an effort with volunteers and staff, and we have methods to in the management plan to identify and a plan to remove the invasives, that will be much better to, you know, set the stage for planting the natives. So I didn't see that in all those goals, remove the invasive species, but that's a big part of what we do in parks is remove the invasive. So I just want to use those words somewhere in the plan.
Wendy, just to clarify, we actually had the county person for invasives come and give a talk to the board. And we have a map of all the invasives that are in the park. It was very rewarding to hear from her that in fact, most of the forest does not have an invasive problem. There are focused areas, oddly, of bamboo. There's a large amount of bamboo in one small area that's very well established, as well as the known English ivy, and of course along the right of way with Chuckanut Drive, a fair amount of Scotch broom and other things. But there are a good deal has been done to identify those. They are mapped in detail on a state level mapping system, and I think that although it's in very good shape according to the person that does that, there is definitely work to do there as well. And that's been developed at a fairly detailed level that we could be happy to share with this planning process.
Will that be part of the plan? I mean, could we make that part of the plan?
I don't think we could do this without that being part of the plan. I think it has to be. For example, the bamboo is relentless. I mean, it's going to have to take a very specific, detailed effort to get rid of it. The English ivy is, maybe it's not hopeless, but it's a challenging thing that we need to make continued efforts at. And of course, Robert is on the edges everywhere, not well established in the forest at all. The basic forest, the canopy and the integrity and the isolation of it has led to a very optimal opportunity to make this invasive free at some point.
Thank you.
That's great. Sounds like there's some wonderful resources then to be able to pull right into the planning process. All righty. Well, our next item here is an assignment for everyone in preparation for your next meeting, which is on 9/24. Lane, are you giving the assignment, or is Nicole today?
I guess I'll dish out the homework. So the homework is really more of a, I'm going to be sending out some materials, and it's a request to go through them at your convenience and then come prepared to discuss at the meeting on the 24th. So I will just share our draft wayfinding map again, just for some reference here. But essentially, you know, this was the city's draft wayfinding and trail plan that we came up with about a year ago. And what I'm in the process of doing right now for this group to kind of guide our starting to dive into creation of the trail plan, wayfinding plan, trail restoration plan for the master plan is splitting this map up. So we have 4 really clear maps of existing trails in the planning area right now, trails that are possibly identified that need to just be obliterated, decommissioned, restored, a look at trails that need more assessment for environmental impacts or you know, topography, and an analysis of whether they should be rerouted, improved, kept, removed, and then a 4th map that will just be a look at access, wayfinding, directional signage. So each of those maps, there'll be 4 really clear maps that have topography and wetlands. And my ask of this group is just to take those maps when I send them to you, start to look through them, make your notes on the maps. And then when we come back on the 24th, the hope is to spend a good part of that meeting starting to work through the trail plan that will be included as a component of the master plan.
Any questions for Elaine about the homework assignment? And we are meeting relatively quickly now, so it'll be every couple of weeks. Keep things rolling along. So you'll want to make sure you start your homework right when you get it there, so you're not at the last minute. May want to go out there on the ground and tromp around and look a little bit. Vincenzo?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to going on another hike.
Excellent. All right. Well, I did note here, again, one of our guests here said that really the big picture on holly and ivy is getting people in the neighborhoods around the park to control their populations of those things. So it's obviously, this is not just an elimination issue. This is a long-term maintenance issue, as is so frequently the case in the park system. So, yeah. All righty. Well, Nicole, yes.
I just wanted to thank the Park District board members for coming today. Analiese has been doing that urban forestry presentation to multiple groups and combining it together. I think it was really important for us all to hear the information at the same time. And I think now, kind of starting to move forward, we really want to get all of the data that we can get together. I will go back and look through and see what other work has been submitted to the city from the Park District, and I'll talk to Robin, or should I talk to you, Bob, or Frank, about making sure we have everything that has been done to make sure we have all the information and start to really lay out the pieces of the plan. And wayfinding, I think the trail plan is kind of the next big piece that we need to kind of really fine tune and get it dialed in. It seems like there's a lot of pieces, and it's time to really start bringing them together and shaping the content for the actual plan so that we can bring those pieces together and then have you respond to them. I think that'll be our plan moving forward. Just I wanted to share those next steps. And then I think doing some more fine-tuned work with the environmental educators is a really good idea, getting a little more focused group. And then if the Park District board is able to do some sort of one day or a few hours out in the park and do some person-to-person interviews and get a little more feedback, I think that would also be really useful. And that invasive species, I think, Frank, you just might have sent something to me about that, or somebody did. So
I did. I sent the map to you and Lane and to all of our members. It's just a screenshot of a proprietary system the state uses, which they don't make public. It's just to give you an idea.
Great. That's good. So anyway, I really feel like I just want to acknowledge the fact that I feel like what we've heard from the public is really reinforcing what our direction was, which was restoration, preservation, no hardscape, no big amenities. And I want you all to broadcast that to the community, because I think there's a little bit of fear right now in the community about what this planning effort might result in. And so the whole Save the Trails petition has been a little bit complicated at the same time as our effort. So I want to make sure. I've had a couple of phone calls, or I hope you're not going to go in and chop down trees and put in playgrounds. So if you could just reinforce the direction of this planning effort in your community, I think it would be really helpful that we're all on the same page, they're working together, and dispel some of the fear myth that is going on a little bit. I would really appreciate that.
I think to address some of that, Nicole, I think one of the things that, because we are a special purpose district, we're a government entity, we have more rules and requirements than the steering committee does even. And so we can't really make representations or decisions at this meeting, but we can at the regular Park District board meeting. And I think one thing that would help with our collaboration, which I think it should be a collaboration between the Park District board and and the Parks Department. And I think there has been, and it looks like that's the direction it's going, which is great. But to make the most of that, it might be a good idea to have to, and I know you have been, but if a member of your department, either Lane or you, can attend at least part of the next Park District Board meeting, I would encourage the Park District to put on its agenda what we can do to help you with this process, what information we can provide to you, and we can actually have some dialogue at that next meeting. I think that would be fruitful for you and also for the Park District Board, and go a long way towards cementing that collaborative relationship. So that's my suggestion on that. And while I've got the floor, I'll just remind everyone, and Frank in particular, we do have to close our special meeting before we sign off.
Yeah. Since this is actually a special meeting of the Park District is officially called, we do have to have a conclusion to it formally.
Let's just make one last check and then you can conclude. I see Hillary's back. Any thoughts, Hillary, well, on what went on today?
No, I apologize. I had to step away. There's been a COVID outbreak at my daughter's school, so it's starting. So now we're quarantining. Yay. So that's what happened to me. But no, I appreciate, I didn't hear the whole discussion, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate what I think Nicole just said, which I really support, which is I really like the, important role that we play of being able to kind of emphasize to everybody that we know sort of what the focus looks like it's going to be with this park. So, restoration, access, that kind of thing. I was also going to say that I really love the idea of as many of us as possible being on this day that we're going to go and chat with people, because the other benefit, in addition to collecting information, is for people to have a face to the people that are making this decision. And that is going to pay dividends down the line too. So I think as many of us as can participate in that as possible, the better.
Yeah, great point, Hillary. I think that makes a ton of sense. I just wanted to check, I don't know if John Brown, were you able to hear everything that went on today and follow what was going on? Do you have anything to add to the conversation? Okay. Oh, your microphone's not on. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear everything, and I don't know if you can hear me, but it's been a very instructive meeting. Thank you. Thank you to Ms. Potter and Nicole for such great work.
And John Blethyn, just checking in with you, tracking with everything here, and any thoughts for the group?
I'm tracking with everything here, but I'm obsessed with the fact there's no water in Fairhaven in Patton Creek. It's virtually bone dry, and although it's out of the planning area, it's vital to the wildlife and of the area, and it's unfortunate, I think, that it's not included in the forest area, because without surface water, there's not going to be a lot of terrestrial life. So that's bothering me, and I'm wondering how we could make a connector maybe on the east end of Fairhaven Parkway or some way. And I'm also concerned about the lack of connection to Conley Creek, and which is basically our connector to the Arboretum. Very important. And these are going to be limiting factors to the effectiveness of this forest.
So maybe the plan has an element to it that discusses those opportunities that are out there. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah. Still no water in Patton Creek. It's very disturbing.
Yeah.
Nice golf course, though.
Thanks, John. Okay, Frank, last thing, and then we're going to close off.
Sure, just to say that, John, that's actually a phenomenon seen nationally this year. There's a disproportionate number of streams that are not flowing, either intermittent streams or even full-time streams that have dried up across the nation. It's a major problem. And it's hopes that our contribution here is a small contribution to mitigating those exact effects. And I also agree with the connectivity with adjacent areas. Again, I want to say thanks, Nicole and Lane. You did a great job. Really appreciate it, and look forward to working with you. With that, I'd like to just call our official meeting of the Chuckanut Forest Park District to an adjournment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. And my compliments to all of you and to the staff who made the presentation today. Thank you very much. All right, we'll see you again, same time, same place on the 24th of September. All the best,
Okay,
everybody. Stay
bye.
safe now.
Nicole. Hi.